Okay, it's f of x equals -1 minus 4/3 x. Okay. The first thing we do with these is we replace that f of x with the letter y. Okay. And then we're going to rewrite our equation that anywhere we see a y, we're going to replace it with an x. And anywhere we see an x, we're going to replace that with a y. So we'll have x equals -1 minus 4/3 y. Now we just solve this equation for y. So we're going to start first by adding 1 to both sides. Okay, that'll cancel the 1 out over here. We're just adding 1 to the left side. Now we need to get rid of this -4/3. So what do we do to do that? We multiply it by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of -4/3 is -3/4. When we do that, that'll cancel out over here. We can't forget, we need to multiply the left side by -3/4 as well. After we do that, we'll distribute that through. We get -3/4 x, and then -3/4 times 1 is -3/4, and that equals y. Okay. Well, finally, all we have to do is just change this to our inverse notation. So that'll be f to the -1 of x equals -3/4 x minus 3/4. And there is our answer to number 1. We're going to roll on and work number 2. Okay, number 2 is f of x equals 4 plus 5x over 2. First step, as always, we're going to replace that f of x with y. Then anywhere we see y, we're going to change that to x. And anywhere we see x, we're going to change that to a y. Now we're just going to solve this equation for y. First thing we do is we're going to multiply each side by 2. So we will end up with 2x equals 4 plus 5y. Now we need to solve this right side for y. So the first thing we're going to do is subtract 4 from each side. We'll end up with 2x minus 4 equals 5y. And finally, get y by itself. We're going to divide each side by 5. So we'll end up with y equals 2x minus 4 over 5. I've run out of room here, but the only thing left to do now is when we get to the end is just change our y to our inverse notation, which is f to the -1 of x. Oh, I'm sorry. That was number 2. Didn't change that. Okay, so there's the workout for number 2. I'm going to move on and we will work through number 3. Okay, number 3 reads f of x equals -1/5 x minus 1/5. First thing we do, we change that f of x to a y. And then we're going to rewrite our equation, changing y to x. And if we see an x, we change that to y. Now we need to solve this right side of the equation for y. So the first thing we're going to do is add 1/5 to both sides. So we have x plus 1/5 equals a -1/5 y. We need to get rid of this fraction over here. So we're going to multiply it by its reciprocal, which is -5 over 1. We need to multiply this side by it as well. -5 over 1 is just -5. So we -5 times x plus 1 over 5. That will equal y. Now we just need to distribute this through. -5 times x is a -5x. -5 times 1/5 is a -1. And there's our answer solved for y. Now we just need to change our y back to inverse notation. So we'll have f to the -1 of x equals -5x minus 1. Let's move on to number 4. Okay, for number 4, we have f of x equals x minus 3 over 2. Changing this f of x to y. rewrite it, changing all my y's to x's, all my x's to y's. I get x equals y minus 3 over 2. I need to solve this right hand for y, so I multiply it by 2 each side. I'll end up with 2x equals y minus 3. Add a 3 to both sides. I get 2x plus 3 equals y. Or if I change it back into inverse notation, f to the negative 1 of x equals 2x plus 3. And there's our answer for number 4. I feel like I'm speeding through this real quick, but I got to keep reminding myself you guys have the ability to pause and rewind and fast forward. So let's move on to number 5. I have f of x equals 2x over 5. I'm going to change that f of x to a y. And then I'm going to rewrite my equation, changing my y's to x's and my x's to y's. So I get x equals 2y over 5. Need to solve this equation for y, so I multiply both sides by 5 first. And then I'm going to divide each side by 2. So y equals 5x over 2. And then changing this back into notation, I'll get f to the negative 1 of x equals 5x over 2. And that is number 5. Moving on to number 6. F of x equals negative 3 plus 7/3 x. First thing we do is we change our f of x to a y. Then we're going to rewrite our equation, changing all our y's to x, all our x to y. So we get x equals negative 3 plus 7/3 y. Need to solve this for y, so the first thing I do is I add a 3 to both sides. I'll get x plus 3. The plus 3 and the minus 3 cancel out. So I'm left with 7/3 y on the right side. To get rid of this fraction over here, I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal. So 7/3 y times 3 over 7, those cancel out. But I have to multiply my left side by 3 over 7. Distributing that through, I'll end up with 3/7 x plus 9/7 equals y. And I'm going to change that to the proper notation, inverse notation. So f to the negative 1 of x equals 3/7 x plus 9/7. Okay. On to number 7. And I have f of x equals 5 minus 3x over 5. So I'm going to change f of x to y, and then rewrite it. Anywhere I see y, I change it to an x. Anywhere I see an x, I change it to a y. So x equals 5 minus 3y over 5. I'm going to solve this for y. First thing I'm going to do is multiply it by 5. So I can get rid of those 5s there. They'll cancel out. I have 5x equals 5 minus 3y. Need to solve this for y. So I'm going to subtract 5 from each side. 5x minus 5 equals negative 3y. I'm going to divide by a negative 3. So that cancels out over here. I will end up with y equals negative 5x minus 5 over 3. I think on the key, I actually distributed this through. So I distributed that negative through the top, and I ended up with y equals, it would have been negative 5x plus 5 after I distributed that through. Okay. Either one of these is technically correct. I just wanted to show you this in case on the quiz, if you have a multiple choice answer, you have to be able to see that these two are the same. So with your work, if you had come up with this, you're technically correct, but this might be the choice that's on your quiz. So just want to point that out to you. Then we're going to change this to the proper notation. F to the negative 1 of x equals negative 5x plus 5 over 3. So that is number 7. Number 8 for you real quick. Okay, 8 f of x equals negative 3/5 x plus 3/5. So I'm going to change that f of x to a y to start. And I'm going to rewrite, changing all my y's to x's and all my x's to y's. So x equals negative 3/5 y plus 3/5. Need to solve this for y now. So I'm going to start by subtracting 3/5 from both sides. Okay. To get rid of this fraction over here now, I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal, which is the reciprocal of negative 3/5 is negative 5/3. But I have to multiply both sides by that negative 5/3. So now this just becomes a distribution problem. So distributing negative 5/3 through x minus 3/5. So negative 5/3 times x is just negative 5/3 x. Negative 5/3 times a negative 3/5, they actually cancel out. The 5's are going to cancel out, and the 3's are going to cancel out. So it's going to be 1, and we have a negative times a negative, which is going to be a positive. So positive 1 on that equals y. So if I lost you on this fraction part here, negative 5/3 times a negative 3/5. Let's look at this here. Our 5's cancel out, and our 3's cancel out. So we're going to be left with just negative 1 times negative 1. That's where I got the positive 1 from. So here's our answer, but we need to change that to the proper notation. So we f to the negative 1 of x equals negative 5/3 x plus 1. Okay. I think on the key, I think I went ahead and flip those around, so it's 1 minus 5/3 x, but those are the same thing. So I only point that out because your quiz is multiple choice, so you got to know that answer, if you come up with an answer like this, it's actually the same as this as well. All I did was just flip these guys around. Okay. Do number 9. Okay, number 9, f of x equals negative 2x. Okay, I'm going to start by changing my f of x to the variable y. And I'm going to rewrite, changing all my y's to x's and all my x's to y's. X equals negative 2y. I'm going to solve for y, which is real easy. Just going to divide each side by negative 2. So x over negative 2 equals y. Probably we don't want that negative in the bottom, just as accurate with the negative out front. Okay. So I will have f negative 1 of x equals negative x over 2. Now I believe on the answer key you're going to see it written like this, negative 1/2 times x. Okay. Again, just know your fractions and everything real well, that those are interchangeable. Negative x over 2 is the same as negative 1/2 x. Finally here, number 10, f of x equals 1 minus 5/3 x. Okay. Again, I'm going to change f of x to y. And everywhere I see a y, I'm going to rewrite it as an x. And everywhere I see an x, I'm going to rewrite as y. Now we need to solve for y. So I'm going to start first. To remove this positive 1, I need to subtract 1 from each side. So x minus 1 equals negative 5/3 y. Get rid of this fraction. I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal. Reciprocal of negative 5/3 is negative 3/5. If I multiply that right side by negative 3/5, I have to multiply this left side by negative 3/5. So now it just becomes a distribution problem. Negative 3/5 times x is negative 3/5 x. Negative 3/5 times negative 1 is a positive 3/5. On my right side, the negative 5/3 and the negative 3/5 cancel out. So I have just y. Okay, so y equals negative 3/5 x plus 3/5. But I need to change this back to the proper notation. So the inverse of x is equal to negative 3/5 x plus 3/5.